Hi everyone, I'm 8% Arab and 4% Jewish, so when it comes to the whole Israel versus Palestine thing, mostly feels like indigestion. And while those two sides are quarreling internally, the remaining 88% of my Eastern European genetic material just wants to grab an alcoholic beverage of sorts, go duh, and treat it like a football game. All that alcohol doesn't really mix too well with what's the turmoil that's going on down there, and so I just end up going to the bathroom 3 times a day. Because they're always fighting! And I really feel like the true agenda with a certain group is made extra obvious when you see this fighting reaching completely unrelated and exaggerated venues and proportions. We're now seeing mostly peaceful pro-Palestine demonstrators throwing mostly peaceful fireworks at Jews in New York. If this is a conflict about land ownership, then why are apolitical Jewish civilians being attacked all over Western nations? And isn't it weird how the rights of Palestinians can only be protected by spitting on random Jewish diners in New York? Anyone trying to claim that anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism are entirely separate things is gonna have a really hard time finding proof for that argument, as the Palestinian side never makes that distinction. This is because Hamas is just another word for the Muslim Brotherhood. That's why every time there's a widely reported clash happening in the Middle East, even Sweden sees mass persecution of Jewish civilians, adults as well as young students, punished by Palestinians who refuse to make that distinction. Last I read about a 12-year-old girl being harassed in school over her ethnicity from the Muslim students, and we've had this problem in Sweden forever, for decades. Especially Malmö is horrible for Jewish people, and thus they now find Israel more safe than Sweden. But it's not just Malmö, and what you see here is not Gaza, it's downtown Stockholm. And in just a few days, more than 17,000 tweets praising Hitler were posted in connection with this conflict. This is not new to me, as I remember when Swedish Prime Minister Stefan Löfven made a single pro-Israel comment on his Facebook page, it was immediately flooded with the same kind of anti-Semitic remarks, all stemming from the Swedish Socialist Arab core voting base. To get to the core of this specific clash that's been reported about recently, footage was released revealing that Israel urged civilians to evacuate before they bombed a military target, while the Palestinian wants children to die so he can make a political point and further the Hamas agenda.
احنا عندك مسؤوليه على الاطفال. بدنا نموت، كل الاطفال لازم يموتوا. لا سمح الله بدك تستشهد عشان تبين بشاعتكم.
Obviously, not the first time something like this has happened. Anti-Zionists are known to use children as human shields. We're seeing such absurd realities as Sweden supporting Hamas while Hamas are bombing IKEA in Israel. We have major Swedish teen media encouraging readers to donate to a terror organization called Islamic Relief that's been banned in numerous Muslim countries. And Sweden's former foreign minister of the right-wing moderate party only blames Jews for the violence. So did the left-wing foreign minister. The globalist Carl Bildt told state media, "What triggered this was the police operation at the Al-Aqsa Mosque. That's like sending Nazis into the Vatican," end of quote. Yeah, not the first time a Swedish politician has compared Jewish people to Nazis. What few people seem to realize is that Israel-Palestine is really just a proxy war between Western capitalism and Eastern communism. That's why China came out with a state media report that is indistinguishable from alt-right propaganda.
Some people believe that U.S. pro-Israel policy is traceable to the influence of wealthy Jews in the U.S. and the Jewish lobby on U.S. foreign policy makers. Indeed, there are over 5 million Jewish people in the U.S. On the rich list of Forbes, there are 18 Jews in the top 40 in the U.S. Jews dominate finance, media, and internet sectors. So do they have the powerful lobbies like some say? Possible. Here comes the real story. The U.S. has used Israel as an instrument for advancing its geopolitical interests in the Mideast since 1960s.
Right, so the failed commie state that wants to claim that even Russia is part of China, the Pacific Ocean belongs to China, Hong Kong belongs to China, Taiwan belongs to China, all of Africa soon belongs to China, as China has been building infrastructure there in exchange for political influence. But you, of all people, are gonna lecture the world on the dangers of imperialism. What a typical commie, always accusing other people of what you're doing yourself. With me today, I have Jewish-Swedish comedian, journalist, and author Aaron Flam. He's written a brilliant book on this topic. It's available in English, and it partially explains a lot of dirt that Sweden has swept under the carpet and fooled the entire world with, but also our culture of hysteria, which is based on historical overcompensation. It also delves into the unholy alliance between socialism and Islamism, which is the theme of today. How are you doing, sir?
I'm doing quite all right. And you? Should I call you Angry Foreigner in English, or should I call you like AF or?
Well, I mean, Angry Foreigner is my name. It's my legal birth name and everything, so.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, I know.
Totally.
Well, in English, it's Angry Foreigner what? Talks. Because in Swedish, it's an angry foreigner.
Yeah, it's an angry foreigner speaks. Foreigner is a weird word, though, because blatte has like a ghettofication meaning to it, which is based on an immigrant stereotype. Yeah. So my name in Swedish was a lot about breaking immigrant stereotypes, but it's very hard to translate to English, so I just stick with what I am, which is an angry foreigner and a critical drinker.
Yes. So much I've gathered. What can I help you with?
Well, my first question is, how do we even begin to explain the violent scenes I showed earlier in the video and the worldwide persecution that we are seeing taking place right now?
Well, in the Arab world, they have a constant indoctrination of state anti-Semitism 24/7, like all days per year, all years per decade, and all decades per century. Yes, it's what, their leaders use as a scapegoat. And in the West, it's been allowed to fester within leftist circles and also big immigrant groups of Muslim persuasion. So every once in a while it simmers over naturally, or it allows to simmer over just to divert attention from something else.
So you could say that Sweden's progressive migration policy has made Jews very unsafe.
In Sweden, yes.
The specific way Sweden has been doing it, yes, because I'm not talking about any other country when I'm criticizing Sweden's specific policy, but there's not a lot of vetting, there's not a lot of ID verification, there's a lot of coddling with terrorists, there's a lot of, we can make a whole video about that, but it's really a pattern that you see a lot of places over the world where you have the left committing an unholy alliance with Islamists. Something mind-blowing is a disproportionate amount of Palestinians, like a scary high percentage, think it should be legal to rape and beat your wife. And that's what the left are siding with here.
In the Hamas covenant from 1988, 1988 is not that long ago, they say that the struggle for Islam in Israel is so important. It's so important that they obliterate Israel, that a woman can go out and fight the Zionists without the permission of her man, and a slave can go out and fight the Zionists without the permission of its master. Now, it's probably just a difference of degrees between being a woman and being a slave, But it shows that even in 1988, Hamas have no problems with slavery. They have no problems with slavery, but they are progressive slave owners. If your slave, even though he's not a Muslim, wants to go out and kill Jews, he is permitted to according to Islam.
Progressive is the key word there, yeah.
Yeah, super progressive slave owners.
You talked a lot about Sweden's support for Palestine in your new book, and it delves into the myth of Swedish neutrality during World War II, but you also spend a lot of time explaining other things about this country and its culture as a whole. Now, how is it all connected? Is there an unholy alliance between socialism and Islamism?
In Swedish politics, definitely. I mean, they have a deal on paper and everything that you can find in their own archives. So that would be a fact. But there's also some sort of ideological kinship, which I think is... there's not an equal amount of love going in both directions. There seems to be a much bigger affinity from the European and American left towards Islamists than the other way around. But the Islamists will gladly exploit the leftists, you know, just as they did in Iran until they take power, and then they will start killing them. I mean, Malmö used to have a few thousand Jews, and now there are only a few hundred left. So, and that's happened in, what, like half a decade? And no one seemed to really cared about it. So, I mean, it comes up to the surface every once in a while. Someone in some magazine writes, "Isn't this a horrible thing that we should be talking about?" And then, nobody talks about it, and it goes away, and then it resurfaces for a blink of an eye, and then disappears again.
In your book, you talked about how there's, amongst the left, there's a general hatred of capitalism and money, and they tend to associate Jews with money. How does that work?
Actually, this is something I've thought about extensively as a comedian, because comedians usually work with stereotypes and caricatures, and both of these modes of expression are derived from something called an archetype in storytelling. Like it's a metaphor for an image you can have of, let's say, a blacksmith, or a king, or a hero, or a trickster. And the Jew is sort of a subcategory to the trickster archetype. And the trickster archetype in itself can symbolize trade and money and things related to banking, let's say. And so in medieval European mindset, the Jew has become sort of a sub-archetype to or a stereotype to the trickster archetype.
Yeah, to symbolize greed, I suppose.
Yes, of course, which was a Christian sin. So as well as usury, you know, lending money for interest rates.
The way I understand it, Jewish people were the only one that were allowed to practice such trades because of religious reasons.
Yeah. So they were. I mean, there was also that.
They were essentially pushed into.
You can't really blame someone from getting rich if you've given away all the banks to them.
Yeah, they were essentially pushed into the banking sector.
Yes.
Because of religious reasons, and then blamed for it.
Yeah. So, but naturally, I mean, there's certain associations in the collective unconscious between Jews and money making. Socialism says that money is bad, basically. I mean, in a very shallow sort of understanding of Marxism, it says money is bad. So and you should hate the rich. And since Jews are associated with the bourgeoisie, or, you know, the rich people, it's easy to go from one ideology to another. Someone once said that anti-Semitism is the socialism of fools, without really realizing that opens up for the opposite accusation, that socialism is the anti-Semitism of intellectuals. Because if you look at the socialist worldview, I mean the simple sort of dichotomy between good and evil in the socialist universe, theology, I would call it. I mean, you could substitute the word bourgeoisie with Jew or cosmopolite, and there's not much of a difference, really.
And I also noticed that certain ethnic groups have more of an education culture than others. So what you typically see is that Jews, Indians, and Asians do very well in a capitalist framework.
Not all Asians, but Southeast Asians, some cultures there have a real affinity for tormenting their kids until suicide or perfect grades in school. So yeah.
Yeah, we all know about you need to become a doctor stereotype that a lot of Asians have to suffer, so...
Asians? I had to suffer that fucking stereotype.
Your father is like one of the most prominent economists in Sweden, I've read.
Yes, he is.
So that must have... What is telling jokes your way of doing like the Krusty the Clown typical rebellion against the...
I don't know, probably partly because as far as I can recall, there's at least one other semi-successful stand-up comedian in Sweden whose father is a professor of economics. There might even be two of them. So there's like 3 stand-up comedians who have fathers of economics. And so obviously there's something about having a professor of economics for a father that makes you emotionally disturbed and, and funnier, hopefully.
I feel like it's like so much pressure that you want to be Olympic, but you're still very smart, so you have to do something good with it, so you become like an anthropologist through comedy instead.
Well, I've always loved comedy, but I always thought I'd be a serious writer when I was a child. But I always had a love for comedy, and then when I started writing, because I wanted to become a writer and support myself from writing, I realized after a few years, when reading my old notes, that everything I write is a joke.
Well, that's pretty natural.
So yeah, why not? Then you just have to accept that you're a clown and try to make the best out of that situation.
I hear you. Now, I was getting into that what we see in America recently is an Asian hate crime epidemic, and the media there pretty much buried that story because it was mostly non-white perpetrators who were
white supremacists. Yes.
Yeah. And I find it interesting how the most successful ethnic groups are victims of socialism, because they will sooner or later take this hatred just because they are successful. And at the same time, you see this very creepy geopolitical connection where countries like America, India, Israel, Japan, Australia are banding together against China. And it seems to me like something that a lot of right-wingers and nationalists and dissidents don't understand is there's a bigger... When they're against Israel, they don't understand there's a bigger battle to be fought here, a bigger question to be answered geopolitically, which is, do you want to live under Western values, or do you want to live under communism or Islamism? What are your thoughts about this conflict?
Well, that's how I view it. I think when I explain it, because there's so many misconceptions and outright lies you have to cut through in order to explain the situation in the Middle East. And it's funny because when you say the situation in the Middle East or the conflict in the Middle East, people automatically think about the situation between Israelis and Palestinians. Although a conflict in the Middle East, to be honest, could be at any point in time anywhere, because there's always conflicts in the Middle East, and there has always been conflict in the Middle East. And I think personally that you could take out the US and Israel out of the equation. Let's say the US never went in to Iraq and never tried to get rid of Saddam, and Israel didn't exist anymore. The Middle East would still just be different shades of dictatorships and theocracy. That's it. That's all it would be. So the first thing I try to do is explain to people, at least in Sweden, because here Swedes, they really love the UN in Sweden. It's just this, they have this utopian view of the UN that rhymes quite very poorly with reality, because they see the UN as this guarantor of democracy in the world, and it might have started as an organization for democracies back in 47, 48, but that was a very long time ago. I mean, all UN bodies I have looked into, at least, are a majority dictatorships. The General Assembly has a majority dictatorships, and you can't have a club for democracy ruled by dictatorships. It just does not promote democracy. It's that simple. So that's the first thing you have to understand. And then I explained that the UN General Assembly from 2015 till today have issued 112 general condemnations of Israel as a country, aimed at Israel. 112 from 2015 till today. The country that comes in second place for the second most condemnations from the UN General Assembly is Russia, and they have gotten, in the same amount of time, 12 condemnations from the UN. North Korea, I think, has 5 or 6 condemnations. So the discrepancy is enormous if you're considering what these other two countries are doing. If you look at Saudi Arabia or Turkey or Qatar or Pakistan, they have 0 condemnations from the UN General Assembly. And when you look at that enormous discrepancy between this tiny, tiny country of Israel, and you compare it to, the amounts of death in the world that Russia causes or Turkey causes in northern Iraq as we speak now, many more Kurds are dying than Palestinians in the West Bank and Gaza. But there are no mass demonstrations in Western capitals in support of the Kurds in northern Iraq. Of course not, because people only care about this conflict. They automatically think about the situation between Israelis and Palestinians when you say the conflict in the Middle East. They don't think about Syria, who also has, I think, 8 condemnations from the UN General Assembly between 2015 and now, like 8. And Israel has 112. So you have to explain that discrepancy, and I explain it with anti-Semitism. So that's the first thing you have to understand is that. And then I've seen a lot of memes going around now this time around, because now the left side of European and Western politics, they have set sail from the coast of reality into the well-charted waters of moral bankruptcy, but with a faulty map, so that they are still lost. Now they're upset with what's going on in Israel and Palestine, and not what's happening in Syria, not what Turkey is doing in northern Iraq, not about what's going on in Yemen. They only care about Israel. Then you have to look, okay, so what happened in Israel this time around? Well, there was a big religious holiday for Muslims, Laylat al-Qadr, and 90,000 Muslims in Israel from north to south gathered on Temple Mount to pray. And then some jihadis from north and south, not so many of the Palestinians from Jerusalem, according to reports, started fights. So they wanted to turn it into a riot. And then police went in to stop it. And why are these riots happening? Well, some would say the Israeli occupation, but in fact there was supposed to be, for like the second time ever, an election held by Abbas, of the Palestinian Authority, but he postponed it on the 29th of April, I think. So that's just a week before these riots broke up, and Hamas at the time warned him not to postpone the elections. And he postponed them, I think, personally, because he knows Hamas would win. Because a majority of Palestinians in the West Bank, just as in Gaza back when Hamas won, would probably vote in Hamas as their leadership. And Hamas, if you read their program, which is called the Hamas Covenant from 1988, well, let's just say it does not seem to promote democracy. First sentence in the Islamic Resistance Movement document of 18th of August 1988 starts, "In the name of the most merciful Allah." Quote, "Ye are the best nation that hath been raised up unto mankind. Ye command that which is just, and ye forbid that which is unjust, and ye believe in Allah." And the second paragraph reads, "Israel will exist and will continue to exist until Islam will obliterate it, just as it obliterated others before it." Said by the martyr Imam Hassan al-Banna, and if you don't know, he was one of the founders of the Muslim Brotherhood. And then it just goes on and becomes more and more anti-Semitic, like in a pretty crazy way, and misogynistic, or rather, they say they value women in the struggle as the makers of men. So not very PC there, if you're a lefty and supposed to care about stuff like that. And some say it has to do with what's going on in Sheikh Jarrah. It's an area of Jerusalem that was bought by Jews, by two consortium of Jews in 1875 from Arabs. And it was bought because it has been a holy shrine within Judaism for thousands of years. Because Shimon HaTzadik, Simon the Righteous, an old top rabbi from 300 BCE, that's 300 years before the birth of Christ. So that's how old that shrine is. And then it's holy for the Muslims, the Palestinians as well, because they claim that the doctor of Saladin, a famous Kurdish Muslim who fought the knights in the Holy Land back in the 1100s or something, his doctor died there. So it's holy to Muslims as well. But you can tell from the chronology that it's been holier for Jews longer. So when you see memes now from the European left about how Israel is the oppressor, they're trying to view everything through their colonialist oppressor spectacles. It's the same spectacles they use within feminism, where men are the oppressor and women are the oppressed, or within race relations, where white people are the oppressors and black people are the oppressed, and economics, where rich people are the oppressors and people with less money are the oppressed.
I'm noticing a pattern here, yeah.
And they use these spectacles for everything. And with these spectacles, you can truly misunderstand everything. Whatever you apply them to, you will probably misunderstand in one way or another. And so this doctor of Saladin, anyway, he died in the 1100s. So if it has been a holy shrine for Muslims, it has been a holy shrine for Muslims approximately 1400 years less than it has for Jews.
But it sounds to me like you can summarize this with the fact that Arabs made very bad business deals and then got angry about it.
Yeah, maybe. I don't know. You could also make the argument that if the country hadn't been flooded with European Jews, it wouldn't have been transformed into this wondrous high technological nation that it is today. It would still be somewhat of a deserty swamp. So, because the Ottomans didn't really care about the place when they had it, and the Brits didn't care about the place when they had it. So it really started to take shape with huge Jewish immigration, which started in the 1800s. When you understand this, when you understand that Hamas raised their children as soldiers to die for their cause. That's what they want their children to do with their lives. And they're hugely anti-Semitic, and they hate women, and they hate democracy, and Islam is the way, and jihad is the path, and the Quran is the constitution. And you understand that the UN is ruled by dictatorships, and the story is longer than this. And what you have, in essence, is a small conflict, a proxy war between the West and totalitarian powers, because the Palestinians are funded, Hamas at the moment, by Iran and its fanatically theocratic regime, and the Arab nations are also dictatorships with varying degrees of Islamist theocracy baked into it. They are all totalitarian, they are all collectivist, they are oppressors, de facto oppressors. And then you have a struggling democracy with freedom for women and rights for women to own and vote and take part in the military, and gay people. And what you have is, this is where the new line between democracy and dictatorship in the world is drawn. And if you end up on the side of Hamas and the Palestinians in this fight, I mean, naturally, if you have no bone in this fight, then maybe you shouldn't care. There are worse fights. But if you are to care about this fight, then it should be a so-called no-brainer. Because on the one side, you have democracy, freedom, equal rights. On the other side, you have totalitarianism, collectivism, and, oppression.
Well, thank you for a very thoughtful analysis. I feel a lot of important things were said here that you don't get through the regular mainstream outlets. And I just want to thank you very much for coming on to my channel. I really hope people read your book. It's absolutely fantastic. And you not only share, but also explain a lot of my criticism against Swedish culture. So I really urge people to read this book if you want to understand why this country is so insane. Thanks a lot for coming on, Aaron.
Thank you, Angry Foreigner.
And make sure to follow Aaron on Twitter, where he does occasionally post in English, do you not?
Occasionally, but there is a translate button.
There is.